Okay, I believe we are live. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining me. This is The Wonder and the Mystery of Being, and this is a special live episode. Yeah, today, what I wanted to do is hop online on YouTube and talk live about the fact that today is May 20th. That's for a small group of people, maybe a meaningful date. For most people, probably not super meaningful. But it's a meaningful date to me because that means a year ago exactly today, I posted on Instagram, sort of going public with my thoughts about what I had been thinking about with regards to my faith and this process of deconstruction that I was on, even though that's not a word that I was using at the time. I didn't really even know that word. I hadn't heard that word. But I just knew that everything that I had always sort of grown up believing was being challenged in my mind. It was sort of I was just questioning very deeply some very core things to do with my faith and my belief. And so I posted this Instagram post. Now, when I posted this, it wasn't like that was. It wasn't like it was something that I had just started thinking about. It was something that I had been thinking about and reading about and learning about for quite some time, but I was doing it really quietly. I was doing it privately. I mean, for a lot of reasons. I had, I had been and was still technically, well, no, at that point, I guess at that point, we hadn't really been doing Hawk Nelson stuff all that much anymore. Um, it's worth noting that, and this isn't a really super public thing, but for the several years before I posted this post a year ago, we had been phasing the band out somewhat, anyways. That was actually something I instigated. I, have two kids, and I had toured for 15 years. And quite honestly, I just didn't want to travel full time anymore. I wanted to be home. I wanted to be rooted somewhere. I wanted to unpack my suitcase. I'd been living out of a suitcase for 15 years. And so that was a process that myself and the other guys in the band were working through. We had various people in the band that had different feelings about how long we wanted to keep going as a band. I was more on the side of like I wanted to phase things out. Not everyone necessarily felt that way, but we all came to agree that we would phase things out. And I think since then, all of us in the band are really grateful that we timed things the way we were. Obviously, we didn't know COVID was coming, and COVID has been an incredibly difficult time for people in bands and musical artists. And so my heart goes out to all of you if you're in the music industry or you know people that are. I mean, it's not just people in the music industry that have had a hard time over this last year and a half, but definitely a lot of my friends in touring bands. It's been a challenging time. And so in that sense, the fact that we phased things out beforehand, I guess we got a little bit lucky there. So I think in retrospect, all of us in the band are sort of on the same page. We're like, okay, that timing was pretty good. But anyway, all that to say, I had been processing these things to do with my faith for, I mean, I guess maybe a year, really a lot, quite aggressively for a year before I posted this post. And the reason why I wrote this post and started talking about this stuff publicly is that I had felt like I had been talking about faith and matters of faith publicly for like 15 years. And so it felt a little bit disingenuous for me to talk about faith when I was in a place where I would call myself a Christian or a believer. And then to go through a process where I was reevaluating those beliefs and then all of a sudden, like, not talk about it. That felt strange to me. It felt asymmetrical. So that was one thing. I felt like if I was going to talk about my faith publicly, I should also talk about my doubt publicly because it felt sort of dishonest not to. So that was one reason why I wrote this post. The other reason is that I felt like if I didn't say something, if I didn't speak out publicly, that I would be sort of participating in this culture of shame that can sometimes surround people that have doubts. And so, if you're out there and if you're someone who's maybe grown up in a religious space or, whether that's Christian or whether that's, another religious space of some kind, or even, what denomination or what version of Christianity you've been a part of might, your experiences might be really different. But if that's you and you began to sort of doubt and question, like, some of you may feel like there was space for those questions and space for those doubts, but a lot of you might feel like there wasn't. And for me, being someone who was sort of like a marginally visible public figure in Christian music, I don't think that like we were like a huge deal, but like we were somewhat visible in definitely our careers depended on us being able to sort of show that, we were living a quote unquote Christian life, and we had Christian beliefs and those kinds of things. And so I think for me, thinking about when I began doubting some of the sort of core things about Christianity, to not talk about that publicly felt like I was sort of participating in this culture that says it's not okay to doubt those things, and that it's like that it's not healthy or that it's not normal. And I actually think it is normal, and I think it is healthy. Now, right there, you could say, well, John, you're just trying to get people to believe what you believe, and maybe there's an element of that, because I mean, quite honestly, in the last year, I've felt a lot of freedom. But ultimately, like, what I really want is for people to be healthy and happy and fulfilled. That's really what I want to see for people, people that I care about. And part of that for me is I think it's healthy to recognize that there's some core beliefs in Christianity that are not nearly as rock solid as at least I thought they were growing up. And when I wrote this post a year ago today, it was coming from this place of like, wow, so many of the things I grew up believing were absolutely concrete are just not concrete. And that caused me to say more or less like, hey, I think I'm questioning the whole deal. Now, Christian apologists or Christian theologians could come at me and say like, well, hey, just because your specific beliefs that you had been given, just because you're doubting some of those specifics doesn't mean the whole thing is untrue. And I actually somewhat agree with that. But this is the key. Like, I think that if you believe that your Christian beliefs are concrete and unmovable, and then you discover that some of those ideas that you had, well, there's some debate about those ideas, and maybe there's some things that are not as sort of black and white as you thought. It can really undermine your certainty. A good example is that, like, there's a few verses at the end of the Gospel of Mark, the last 8 verses of the Gospel, or the last 12, verses 9 through 20. So the last 12 verses of the Gospel of Mark. Most scholars agree that those were added later, that they were not in the original. And the reason that they believe that is because the oldest manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark don't have those additional verses. That's called the long ending of Mark. Now, learning stuff like this, if you don't know it, earlier on, it can be kind of jarring. And so stuff like that for me was like, whoa. Wait. Are you telling me that there was stuff added later and that pretty much all scholars, including like conservative Christian scholars, agree like, yeah, those are actually probably added later. And there's only a couple of these that we know about for sure, but stuff like that, like learning things like that, really caused me to step back and go like, hey, whoa. I've always looked at the Bible, like the Bible in English that I'm reading, as like the inerrant word of God. And you're telling me that even conservative Christian scholars like believe that there were verses added, and like that's sort of just something that scholars know and agree on. And like, what does that say about about everything else? Like wouldn't that cause doubt? And so like those are the kinds of things that I encountered when I was going through this process of deconstruction that sort of gave me pause. And so anyway, I don't really know how I got on that tangent, but what my goal has been in this whole process is to let you in on my journey in a way that's hopefully helpful to you all, to see that there's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of things that are just gray areas and uncertain. My sort of take on the whole field of Christian apologetics is that, like, if you're someone who wants to believe that Christianity is true, then you will probably find Christian apologetic arguments very compelling, because you'll latch onto them and be like, oh, see, like it all makes sense, right? But if you're someone who doesn't necessarily want to believe that every sort of doctrinal, is that the right way to say that? Doctrinal? Someone help me out in that. But if you're someone who isn't dedicated to the idea that these doctrines are true necessarily, that maybe we're open to the idea that they're partially true, or based on an idea that might be true, or maybe some things that aren't true at all. If you're playing around in that headspace, then a lot of apologetic arguments don't necessarily hold water for you. And I find myself in that category where I just don't find myself satisfied by some of the answers in Christian apologetics to the questions that I had. And so that sort of put me in a place where I led up to this post that I wrote a year ago. Yeah, like it just led me to a place where I remember feeling, oh, I don't think I believe this whole thing. And that was really, really terrifying, honestly. That's another trope. I mean, I think that a lot of people sometimes, a lot of people who go through a process of deconstruction sometimes have this thrown at them that like, oh, they're just looking to go out and do some sinning. Like I've been seeing a lot on Twitter recently. A number of Christian apologists have been saying something to the effect of like, oh, well, it's always got something to do with your sexuality. Like usually people deconstruct because they want to sleep with someone that the Bible says they can't sleep with. And I'm just like, there's so much that's absurd about that to me. And I find it really frustrating because like one of the Christian apologists who has been saying that recently is someone who I have been on his show and talked about my process of deconstruction, and my sexuality was not a factor. I'm a cisgender, hetero, white male. like I'm as vanilla as it gets in this area. And for me, just the only way that I could see that maybe sexuality was a factor is the fact that I do believe that the sort of Christian purity culture stuff that a lot of us encountered growing up it can be pretty harmful. So other than that, and also like just affirmation of the LGBTQ plus community, like that is a factor for me for sure. And so I guess if you wanted to say that sexuality in general has something to do with it, I guess that's true. But my own sexuality has absolutely nothing to do with this process for me. So anyway, let's get to it. I feel like what I'm going to do here, I'm seeing a number of people leaving comments. Doctrinal, that's what I'm hearing. Doctrinal is the way to say it. So, okay, well, let's go ahead and read this post. So what I want to do is go back and read this post from a year ago. And I think I maybe reread it a couple of times after I first posted it, but I definitely haven't read it in like at least 8 or 9 months, probably longer. So I'm curious to see what jumps out at me here. I haven't, leading up to this live stream, I didn't prepare myself. I didn't go like, hey, like let's read this and like write out some notes. Like I'm coming at this totally blank. So I'm going to take a sip of, what am I sipping on here? Strawberry cucumber sparkling water. And side note, I got my second dose of Moderna vaccine this morning. And on my first dose, it's like I got a little bit of a sore arm. On my second dose, my arm is destroyed. Just like I can't lift it. It's like I just went to lift up this drink and it hurt. So I'm hoping that I don't feel any like crazy effects. But yeah, the arm, that is no joke. But I'm real happy to be vaccinated, so I will say that. All right, let's get into this. All right, I'm just going to start reading this post. Before I do, I want to make a little note. I posted this thing on May 20th, 2020. Today is May 20th, 2021. I said earlier that that's not a significant date for most people, and that's true. It is a significant date for two people I really care about, and that's my parents. And that's because May 20th is their anniversary. Yes, I posted this on their anniversary last year, which is pretty much right at the top of the list of things I regret about this post. As we go through the post, we might find a few things I regret. I can think of one other one, but other than that, this one and one other one I can think of, but we'll see where this goes. But overarchingly, my biggest regret is posting this on my parents' anniversary. The way that played out is that, quite honestly, leading up to posting this, I sort of lost track of the days, and I wasn't thinking about the fact that it was their anniversary. And so I texted the morning of this post. Before I posted this, I started texting family, friends, hey, letting them know, like, this is what I'm going to be posting. I want you to hear it from me, before just getting sideswiped on it on Instagram. And so I texted my parents and my mom, and like then someone reminded me, or I can't remember if it was my parents or one of my siblings, like, hey, it's mom and dad's anniversary. Like, maybe you don't do it today. And my mom even asked me, like, hey, can you not post this today? And I said to her, like in my mind, like the ball was rolling. Like I had written it. I was literally ready to hit post. And I was so emotional and worked up that I just couldn't bear the thought of sitting on it. I couldn't bear it. And so I just told my mom, like, if I don't hit post on this, I feel like I'm going to burst. And I hit post. And I really regret doing that because it really tainted what's supposed to be a special day for them. Just so you all know, it is their anniversary today. So mom and dad, I don't think you're watching right now, but mom, I think you're going to watch this later. And so happy anniversary. And just everyone out there know, I talked to my mom before this live stream and told her what I was doing. And I said, it's really not a big deal compared to what I did a year ago. But it might just clarify some things as to like what my journey has sort of looked like in the following year. Anyway, at this point, I've preambled for, 17 minutes. So maybe we should get to it. So regret number one, I wish I hadn't posted this on my parents' anniversary. It was a pretty douche move on my part. And I would not, if I could go back and do it differently, I would go back and do that differently for sure. Okay, one more sip of this. All right, here we go. Maybe I should read the caption first. Let me see. Yeah, let's just read the caption. So this is what I captioned the post. This is like sort of the overarching vibe. I've been terrified to post this for a while, but it feels like it's time for me to be honest. I hope this is not the end of the conversation, but the beginning. That's interesting. That ended up being true. I hope this is encouraging to people who might feel the same but are as afraid to speak as I am. I want to be open. I want to be transparent with you all and also open to having my heart changed in the future. I'm not looking for a debate at all, just a chance to share my story in the hopes some good can come from it. I love you all. Okay. Yeah, I don't think I have much to say about that. That's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, let's get into the actual post. All right, here's the beginning. This is not a post I ever thought that I would write, but now I feel like I really need to. I've agonized over whether to say this publicly, and if so, how to do it. But now I feel that it's less important how I do it and more important that I do it. So here it goes. Okay, that's interesting. I don't remember writing that specifically. I guess I knew that I was not going to be doing this perfectly, but I felt like it was important to do it even if I was going to be doing it imperfectly. So, okay, that's a start. I want to just make sure I can see your comments here because I'm seeing some comments come in. Okay, I'm going to continue. After growing up in a Christian home, being a pastor's kid, playing and singing in a Christian band, and having the word Christian in front of most of the things in my life, I am now finding that I no longer believe in God. That's interesting. I think I worded that kind of carefully. I am now finding that I no longer believe in God. So I can see that I was like hedging my bets a little by saying I am now finding. It was almost like I was distancing myself from the sort of whether or not it's a decision, right? Because this is a question. This is an interesting question. Like, do you believe that it's a choice to believe in God or not? Or do you believe that it's something that you find yourself persuaded by or not persuaded by? And so the question sort of becomes like, do you choose your beliefs? Now, in evangelical Christian circles, um, there's a real sense that you do choose your beliefs, right? Because it's like, think about, make a decision for Christ. Like I think a lot of Billy Graham Association events are called decision, and then with the year, like decision 20, or maybe is that the election? Oh shoot, I might be getting that mixed up. Anyway, I think that deciding to believe or deciding to put your faith in God, there's a real emphasis on choice there. And I sometimes I've seen it broken down into two components. It's like there's belief, and then there's belief in God, and then there's sort of putting your faith in him, or putting your heart in his hands, or choosing to like make him your Lord and Savior. And I could see that second one being sort of more of an active choice, right? Like, say you believe that God is real, that is debatable as to whether or not that's a choice, right? Because you could say that like you don't choose whether you believe there is a God. It's just you find yourself persuaded or not. But then beyond that, a lot of Christians would say that there's a second step, which is choosing to recognize that he's your Lord and Savior. So that definitely would be a choice, that second part. I think Apologia, who he's been on the show before, I think he has some videos about that. I think he deals with reasonable believers and unreasonable believers, and reasonable unbelievers and unreasonable unbelievers. Yeah, I can't remember. Go looking for Apologia's work on that. I think that was kind of an interesting video that he put out. Anyway, I wrote that I am now finding that I no longer believe in God. Now, over the course of the past year, I've waffled on this because I have said a few times that if I could rewrite that sentence, I would say, I am now finding that I no longer believe in God as I once did. Now, that's definitely true. Like, I used to believe in God in a certain way, and then over the course of the last year, I've sort of flirted with the idea of believing in God in alternative ways. And again, I'm not sure how much is conscious choice here and how much is just what I feel persuaded by, depending on what books I've been reading and, videos I've been watching and stuff. And so I've had moments where I've thought like, well, maybe I believe in God, but just like not the version of God that I believed in growing up. And maybe that looks like something like, you'll hear a lot of progressive Christians talk about maybe the universal Christ, or sort of the divine, or maybe this sort of like more vague sense of God being something other than like a very specifically defined being like we see in most Christian culture. I think I've flirted with that, but then I've also like more recently come to a place where I'm like, if I were to say believing in God, the thing that most people think when you say that phrase, I don't believe, like as I find myself today, I don't believe in God like that. So using language in a way that hopefully like actually communicates things that are meaningful to people, like I think that I would have to say I probably still don't believe in God, because I don't believe in God the way that most people would receive the word God, if that makes sense. There's a lot to parse out there, because I am open to the idea of there being some sort of divine realm. But again, what that means is really squishy. I'm open to the idea that the universe came from somewhere or something. There's a lot of ambiguity there for me. But the very, very specific conception of God that I had growing up, yes, I definitely don't believe in that. So yeah, there's some openness there. Anyway, I should probably keep going. So I said, I am now finding that I no longer believe in God. The last few words of that sentence were hard to write. Yeah, that's true. I remember agonizing over that sentence. And even seeing it written down felt really weird, and not necessarily exciting and welcome, but more scary and terrifying. I find myself wanting to soften that statement by wording it differently or less specifically, but it wouldn't be true, or it wouldn't be as true. Oh, that's interesting. So I even recognized right then that like I wanted to soften it. And maybe, yeah, like maybe I felt that at various times over the past year too, that I wished I had softened that phrase. But then I have moments where I'm like, no, that says it exactly right. And so obviously I've sort of, I've waffled a little bit on what God means to me over the past year. Okay, the process of getting to that sentence has been several years in the making. It didn't happen overnight or all of a sudden. It's been more like pulling on the threads of a sweater and one day discovering that there was no more sweater left. That's true. Now, what's interesting is after I wrote this, some people pointed out the deconstruction stories from Rhett and Link from the mythical podcasts. And I think they used a very similar analogy. I can't remember if it was a sweater or something like that. I didn't know anything about their sort of deconstruction process. I actually didn't know who they were when I wrote this. I had never heard of them at that point. And I think they did post their stuff in like February of 2020. So they were out there talking about this before I was. But I didn't get that metaphor from them because I didn't know who they were. We just happened to, land on a similar one. So yeah, okay, let's keep going. Where was I? The sweater. I've been terrified to be honest about this publicly for quite some time because of all that I thought I would lose. Yeah. I'm still scared, but I'm writing about this now for a few reasons. Firstly, I simply can no longer avoid it. Processing this quietly felt right when I simply had doubts, but once they solidified into a genuine point of view, it began to feel dishonest not to talk about it. So I was alluding to that a few minutes ago. Obviously, I was already sort of processing my reasons for talking about this publicly. Secondly, I've had private conversations with trusted friends about my doubts and discovered to my absolute shock that they are shared by nearly every close friend my age who also grew up in the church. Okay, I should probably qualify that. I think that was an overstatement. I do have a lot of very close friends that are in Christian circles or were and had a lot of similar questions to what I had. Now, do I think it's fair to say nearly every close friend my age who also grew up in the church? That maybe is a bit of an overstatement. I do think that because I had some questions and doubts for some time, I was probably drawn to people who also had a less that also held their faith with less certainty. I was probably drawn to people like that. And so some of my closest friends, even today, are people who are Christian, but have a lot of questions about stuff and they're not sure about stuff and approach their faith with like hey, like I actually am not sure, but this is for me right now the healthiest way for me to live my life. And so my Christian friends that approach their faith that way, I feel like I can sort of get on board with that and I can remain close with, my Christian friends who approach things that way, who really are wrestling with it, especially when it comes to social issues. Christians that are sort of have backed away from some of the more harmful things that I think Christian culture can sort of put out there, such as, being, anti-LGBTQ plus, being sort of very harsh when it comes to purity culture and strict sort of doctrines on hell and salvation, penal substitutionary atonement theory. You can look, there's videos out there about all that stuff. But anyway, I still have great relationships with Christians who wrestle with all those things. And I feel like, I feel like it may have been a bit of an overstatement for me to say that nearly every close friend my age who grew up in the church shared my doubts. I would say my very closest friends shared some more of them than I would have thought. And so that surprised me, and that's probably why I wrote this. Okay, I'll continue. I'm stunned by the number of people in visible positions within Christian circles that feel the same way as I do. That is true. I have had people in the last year, I have had pastors reach out to me and say that they're deconstructing and they can't talk about it because their livelihood is on the line. I've had other Christian artists say the same thing to me. I've had Christian music artists come out and tell me that they don't believe in God at all and they don't know what to do because they their livelihood is based on Christian music. They've built an entire career around it. And I just feel so much empathy for people who have invested all this time into a career, whether it's pastoring, especially pastors, honestly, and then find themselves asking questions and doubting and just not having the space and being worried about how they're going to provide for their families. Like I feel for those people, you know? And I've heard from a ton of them in the last year. I've also heard from a lot of Christians, friends that people I'm friends with, who are Christian, but have given up the idea of hell and say, yeah, I'm more of like a universalist. I think God will reconcile everyone unto himself. There's some interesting scriptural support for that for those of you that are Christians. I recommend quite often the book Her Gates Will Never Be Shut by Bradley Jersak. It is about ideas of hell and various ideas of hell that you could sort of adopt based on scripture and the fact that there's actually a range of ways you can interpret scripture. And that's actually, he's a Christian, so that's sort of out there more for people that are of a Christian persuasion, that want to learn more about some of these different ways of viewing hell based on scripture. Her Gates Will Never Be Shut by Bradley Jersak is a great book for that. Now, if you want a more sort of secular perspective on heaven and hell, a book I really appreciate it's just called Heaven and Hell, and it's by Bart Ehrman. And he sort of breaks down where we got our ideas about heaven and hell, both in scripture and also in sort of Greek culture, Jewish culture, and then early Christian culture. And so, yeah, I'm getting on a tangent here, but one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of my Christian friends, not a lot, but some, have become universalist in their views and don't feel like they can talk about that because they would be, I don't know, I guess considered heretics, because still the traditional Christian view is that there is a hell. And I've noticed over the past year, like, if you try to refute hell, like, I've actually found that like a lot of Christians get more mad at me when I challenge the idea of hell than if I challenge the idea of God. And that's like staggering to me because it's like, isn't the idea of hell like the question I want to ask is like, regardless of what you believe about hell, if you're a Christian, like what's more interesting to me is like, what do you want to believe about hell? Like, doesn't the idea that maybe God, say you're a Christian and you believe in God and you believe in heaven, doesn't the idea that God would reconcile all things unto himself, that everyone would go to heaven, and that doesn't mean there's no justice, but like that God, rather than sort of eternally punishing those who just like didn't get it right, that God heals those people and also heals the people that they hurt. Like, wouldn't healing across the board and reconciliation, wouldn't that be something that like, why wouldn't we want that if that's possible? And so like, I find it really interesting that I get this pushback when I, challenge ideas about hell. Because it seems to me that at that point, if we're clinging to the idea of hell because we need to hold on to the idea that people will be punished, that's punitive justice. And like, it just doesn't strike me as something that an all-powerful and all-loving God would be limited to. Like, it seems like an all-powerful and all-loving God could come up with something better. So anyway, that's a tangent I'm on. But okay, let's go back to this. Anyway, my point in all of that was that a lot of my Christian friends actually at this point don't believe in hell either. so, but they can't talk about it because they'll be ostracized. So there's a lot of pressure to maintain the party line if you're a public figure in Christianity, a lot, because your livelihood's on the line. And, if you're uncertain about exactly which view you think is true, then it's the safest to just go with the majority, because it's the least likely to threaten your livelihood, your ability to put food on the table or roof over your head, and you're more likely to have a prosperous career, I think. Anyway, okay, so I said, I'm stunned by the number of people in visible positions within Christian circles that feel the same way as I do. Like me, they fear losing everything if they're open about it. I hope that my openness and transparency can be an encouragement to them and to you if you feel the same. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Thirdly, I've got a whole lot less to lose now. The band isn't playing shows or making new music at the moment, and we've all found other work and careers to focus on for the time being. In order to make sure I'm able to keep providing for my family, that had to be the case before I could be totally honest. And that fact is one of the issues that I have with the church and Christian culture in general. Okay, so I've just been talking about that this whole time, so you don't need me to expand on that. So if you're someone who follows me because of Hawk Nelson and my involvement in Christian music, you're probably thinking, wait, were you lying to me this whole time? Were you pretending to be a Christian? What about all those songs you wrote? Did you mean those? The short answer is that I was not lying. I did believe those things at the time. I may have been pulling on the threads of the sweater, but there still was some sweater left back then. Yeah, that's all true. None of that has changed for me. I still meant what I wrote when I wrote it. In retrospect, I've come to see that I was participating in a culture that was just all I had ever known, and using the language that I had been given, and so yeah, I meant it, and I hadn't given myself space to really deeply ask the questions that I eventually came to ask, and so yeah, I was writing about what I knew in the language that I knew, and so I don't have any regrets there. Like, I feel like I was being honest to my perspective and my viewpoint at that time. So, okay, I'm going to keep going. So what did this sweater thread pulling process look like? Okay, let's get into it. Okay, here's the meat. I grew up in a loving Christian home. My dad was a pastor and still is, as far back as I can remember. As far back as I can remember, life was all about the church. It was our community. It was our family. That's true. And actually, that's one of the things that I think religious communities do very, very well is create this sense of family, this sense of like, we're going to look out for each other. That's something that people who deconstruct, that's a real loss for people who, people who go through this process of deconstruction or choose to sort of re-examine their faith or let their faith evolve. Losing that community can be really devastating. I think for a lot of people, COVID sort of interrupted their sense of community and maybe gave them the space to begin to ask questions that maybe they didn't feel like they had the space to ask before. I had an episode with Kyle and Nisha Brost a few weeks ago that came out of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church. And for them, COVID was the space that they needed to ask their questions. And they came out on the other side of COVID feeling like they didn't believe what they went into COVID believing. And I think for me, it may have played a similar role. Like, I was asking questions well before COVID, but COVID gave me the space to go like, okay, like it's time to talk about it. Because it sort of felt like the whole world was ending anyways. And so I guess I just wanted to be honest. But yeah, this is an interesting point. I think community can be very difficult for people that are going through a process of deconstruction. And that's one of the reasons that I continue to talk about this stuff is I'm trying to put stuff out there that makes people realize that, that you all, if you're going through a process that looks anything like mine, you are very much not alone. And so that's been one of my motivators. Okay, I'm going to keep going. It feels important to point out that church wasn't something we went to once a week. It was more like something we came home to as often as possible after bravely venturing out into the world when necessary. It wasn't a part of our life, it was our life. Yeah, that's true. Like, church was my whole life. Like, all of our friends were in church. I went to a Christian school. In the early 90s, the churches that I was a part of kind of went through this experience called the Toronto Blessing, in which a lot of wild things were happening. My whole family really got really caught up in that. And that involved, for a time, like, churches doing church services like 6 days a week. And so we were just like in it, Okay, I'm going to keep going. When you grow up in a community that holds a shared belief, and that shared belief is so incredibly central to everything, you simply adopt it. Everyone I was close to believed in God, accepted Jesus into their hearts, prayed for signs and wonders, and participated in church, youth groups, conferences, and ministry. So I did too. Yeah. So I've just sort of, that alludes to what I was just talking about, that like it was sort of our whole world. And I think for a lot of people, especially in evangelical Christian circles, that's sort of the way the culture works. It's like, if you're involved in the worship team, it's like say you're a teenager, late teenager, or maybe a college age in the worship team, and it's like Wednesday night is youth group or college group, Thursday night is worship practice, Sunday morning, you get there early to like set up and get ready, and so you're involved. That's 4 days a week right there, 3 days a week right there, and then a lot of times there's a small group and maybe outreach programs on Saturday, which actually is like one of the things that when churches have outreach programs to help in the community, like that's actually one of the areas I respect the most, because you're making a tangible difference in people's lives. And so that's like going to be the last area of church life that I criticize. But if you do all those things, like, right, that's like, it's easily 3 days a week, 4 days a week. It's inundating your whole life. Okay. I became interested in music, began playing and singing on worship teams, and started leading worship at church and youth events. Even then, I remember being uncomfortable with certain things. Praying in public always felt like some kind of weird performance art. Yeah, so I don't know if you all have ever experienced this. Did you ever like go in a circle and pray in a circle? And like, that everyone's going to say something, and everyone's trying to come up with like, oh, I'm going to say something really good. It needs to sound really spiritual. And then the person right before you says like the exact same thing you were going to say. And you're like, oh no, now what am I going to say? And like the girl over there that thinks I'm super spiritual because I'm a worship leader, she's not going to think that I'm all that spiritual if I just say, yeah, amen to all of that. Or like, I echo all of these prayers, or maybe like if you're really secure in yourself, like maybe you can just say, yeah, amen to that. Or I echo that. And maybe you were secure enough that you could handle that, but not me. I was like always terrified that I wasn't gonna say something meaningful enough or spiritual enough or like deep enough in those public prayers. Okay, here we go. Emotional cries such as "Holy Spirit, come fill this place" always felt clunky and awkward leaving my lips. Yeah, so I noticed even when I was songwriting that I was comfortable saying God, but I wasn't really comfortable singing Jesus, because like it's almost like God felt like this big, powerful idea, and Jesus felt so specific that it had almost like it was almost like too personal or something. I always felt uncomfortable singing Jesus. I remember there's actually a song on our Made album called Faithful. It's the only song I can remember singing Jesus. And I remember even recording that vocal and being like, I don't feel weird about most of this song, but I feel weird singing Jesus in this hyper emotional way, I felt weird about it. And I just pushed that out of my mind because everyone I was around, they were comfortable singing Jesus. And like, another thing I was always uncomfortable with is referring to God as king. That felt really weird to me, and I never felt comfortable doing like, oh, my king. And like in conversation, you would never say that, right? You'd never say like, oh yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to pray to my king. I mean, I guess maybe some people talk like that, but I didn't talk like that. And so it felt weird to sing in a way that I didn't talk. And I felt like I would notice that in worship music. Like, we're using terminology that we would never use in conversation. And so it felt, I don't know, just like I always had this weird sort of that's good, total Christianese language, but I had a check in my spirit, right? Like I had this sort of like, well, like something about that feels off to me. Yeah, so I noticed that. All right, let's jump back into the post. Will Thorpe says, "Oh, I was all about the king. Made me very unpatriotic." That's funny. Will Thorpe is a friend of mine. He runs a Instagram account called Heretical Theology, and it's he does deep dives into all kinds of history, scripture, all kinds of stuff, and also we share a love for running. So shout out to Will. Love you, Will. Okay, let's keep going. A youth conference I attended encouraged every teen to sign a pledge that they would date Jesus for a year. It felt manipulative and unsettling to me. I didn't sign it. Okay, so I don't name that here, but some of you will know what conference that might have been. It was an Acquire the Fire conference. Now, I think this was early 2000s in Hamilton, Ontario, and I was not a youth leader, but I was in a youth group where I was one of the older people. There was a lot of younger youth than me, and I remember like Ron Luce, and I don't remember if he was the one putting the pressure on to sign this pledge, so I don't want to call him out specifically. I mean, Ron Luce organized. He was sort of the guy behind Acquire the Fire, so definitely, he bears some responsibility for anything that's on stage if it's his event. But I don't remember if it was him specifically that did this, but someone got on stage and was like laying it on thick about like, you guys really need to not be dating. And this was at the height of like, I Kiss Dating Goodbye, Josh Harris. And ironically, Josh Harris and I have become good friends on the Instagram DMs over the past few months. And if you don't know, he's come out and said he regrets writing that book. He's taken it out of print. He has also gone through his own process of deconstruction. And if you listen to any of the podcasts he's done or content he's put out, he has this very kind, soft approach to his perspective now that feels to me like it carries a lot of awareness of some of the damage that was done by things like purity culture and his book. But this experience that I'm writing about here in this post, this encouragement to date Jesus for a year, yeah, that was very much something that was in the water in Christian culture at that time, in a number of different ways. And so I remember turning to all these younger people in the youth group and being like, yeah, you do not need to sign that. I remember feeling like it was super manipulative and super heavy-handed, because it's like someone getting up on stage and saying, everyone here needs to not date anyone else for a year and you need to pledge to date Jesus. It's like sort of like, it's not taking into consideration that everyone in that arena had their own life and their own journey. And that's one of the issues I find with purity culture. Like, I think when I challenge ideas of purity culture, when I come out and say that I think purity culture is harmful, sometimes people push back at me and say like, are you telling me that like a man and a woman waiting to have sex until they're married is harmful? That's absurd. And I'm like, no, I'm not saying that it's harmful for a man and a woman to choose to wait to have sex until they get married. I'm saying that telling an entire generation of people that is the only way to be happy and healthy and holy, that's harmful. That's saying that there's only one way to do it. So getting up on stage and saying, hey, arena full of youth group people who I've never met, you all need to do this exact same thing, this exact same way. I just think that's really harmful. Not to mention any of the like queer kids in the room. Like, imagine kids that were like gay and not out yet. Like, imagine how isolated they would have felt if, they're basically being, especially at that time, like people are a lot more open now. But especially at that time, this is almost 20 years ago. I'm just imagining kids in that room who knew that they were gay or trans and feeling so unloved and unsupported. Like that makes me sad. Anyway, that's one of the reasons that affirming the LGBTQ plus community is such a big deal to me, is because I have too many friends whose stories have impacted me, where I see it as such a fundamental issue. It's just a matter of like, are we going to treat human beings well or are we not? To me, it's that simple. Okay. All right, let's keep going. All right. I figured I was overthinking all these things. This was the beginning of my doubt, and I began to develop the reflex to simply push it down and soldier on. After all, everyone I knew and loved believed in God, Jesus, and the Bible, so I felt it must be true. Yeah, like I said, it's your whole world, right? At the age of 20, I joined Hawk Nelson and began touring with the band. It was a blast. Our music wasn't overtly Christian, but as time went on, we became more outspoken about our faith and our music. To be fair, I was one of the loudest voices pushing for that shift because I believed it would lead to more success in the Christian music world. Okay. I'm going to take a little sip here. This is one of the paragraphs I've been criticized for, and I understand why. It sounds like what I'm saying is I was interested in writing whatever music would be successful regardless of whether I believed in it or not. That's not what I was trying to say. I do think that if you're writing about things that you do believe, there's a whole world, like there's a whole range of things that you could write about that you do believe, right? And then within that world, there's a bunch of stuff you could write about that maybe isn't going to be super successful. Or there's ways that you could write that might not be super successful. And then there's ways that could be successful or more meaningful to people. And I mean, when you are making music or art or even like YouTube content or anything, like the degree to which you're able to make things that are meaningful to people will correlate to how successful you are. And so I wanted to be more successful and I wanted to make things that were more meaningful, but all of that was within the space of things that I believed. I was never interested in writing things I didn't believe. In fact, I don't have the stamina is not the right word. I just don't feel like I have the ability to go out and sing songs and write songs that I know I don't believe in. I just wouldn't have had that belief. So, I mean, hey, people could accuse me of it, and they certainly have over the last year, but this is just my perspective. I did want to be more successful, and I did think that being more overt about our faith was part of what would make us more successful. But that's also related to us being more effective and making things that are more meaningful. And it's still within the space of what I believed and what we believed. So yeah, that's some clarity there. All right, here we go. When I became the lead singer and main songwriter in 2012, this shift was fully realized. We went from singing songs like Bring 'Em Out to songs like Drops in the Ocean. Google the lyrics, the difference is not subtle. Yeah, that's true. Even through this shift, there were many things about Christian culture that made me uncomfortable. In fact, the list was growing. There were things that just didn't make sense to me. If God is all loving and all powerful, why is there evil in the world? Can he not do anything about it? Does he not choose to, or does he choose not to? Is the evil in the world a result of his desire to give us free will? Okay, then what about famine and disease and floods and all the suffering that isn't caused by humans and our free will? If God is loving, why does he send people to hell? My whole life, people always said, you have to go back to what the Bible says. I found, however, that consulting and discussing the Bible did not answer my questions. It only amplified them. Okay, so I'm gonna pause here real quick. I'm seeing a couple of super chats come in here. I've never done super chats before. So first off, thank you for helping support my channel here. I'm going to come back to these super chats when we're done. So hopefully they linger and I'm able to find them. But yes, thank you. I just wanted to acknowledge those right here and right now. So thank you so much for those super chats. We'll get back to those questions. Okay, so here I'm talking about the problem of evil. And the problem of evil was like a really big deal for me. I've shared in a number of places that my trip to Uganda and the documentary I did in Uganda about this people group called the Batwa, seeing what I saw there brought the problem of evil home for me in a really emotional way. I mean, half of the kids in these Batwa communities don't make it to the age of 5. And for reasons that are totally preventable, it's just that resources are required in order to prevent this. And so there are people on the ground trying to provide those resources. But I was just struck by this feeling of like, if I was God and if I was a loving, powerful God, I would just not allow this circumstance to exist. And we can make all sorts of intellectual arguments as to why a God might allow this kind of suffering to happen. And there are arguments out there, like free will is a common example. It doesn't address natural evil. I should probably do a whole video about moral evil and natural evil. But you can Google those things. Moral evil is basically like evil. The word evil is kind of problematic, actually, because it's sort of bringing a moral element into it anyway. So I kind of prefer... Oh, I'm getting a text from Shannon Q. She says your super chats. She says something helpful about the super chat. So we'll get to the super chats. Thank you, Shannon. Check out Shannon Q's channel, by the way. She's awesome. I've been on her show, and we've recorded a conversation from my show that'll come out in a couple of weeks. And Shannon's a dear. You're a dear, Shannon. Okay, so what was I talking about? Oh yeah, evil. We should touch on that more later, but that was a really pivotal question for me, is like the super basic question of like, if God can do anything, and if he loves as much as anyone could love, then why is there so much suffering in the world? And that's a problem that's sort of unique to monotheism. Like, if you believe in many gods, and you can say, well, there's suffering because there's like a war between the gods, or there's tension between the gods. But if you only believe in one God, and if that God is all powerful, and if that God is loving, it doesn't really make a ton of sense why there would be suffering. And so that's something that a lot of Christian theologians have had to explain. I'm going to take another sip here. Nonstop talking is no joke. I don't know how people do this. So a lot of the explanations, just for me, I mean, without getting too deep into it, a lot of the explanations just are not satisfying. One of the ones that seems the most interesting is called the soul building argument. And I think Inspiring Philosophy and Capturing Christianity both tackle that. And I don't find it satisfying, obviously. But if you're someone who is interested in what the soul building sort of explanation for evil or suffering is, those are probably good places to look. Again, I don't think I agree with them, but yeah, I figured I'd put that out there. But one of the things that I came to realize is that for me, the problem of evil is sort of nested in a larger problem, which is divine hiddenness. Divine hiddenness is basically the idea that's like, if God is real, then where is he? That's basically the simplest way to say it. It's like, okay, like we don't ever doubt that, I mean, with very few exceptions, we don't ever doubt that we live on a planet. We experience gravity. There's things that are hard, like this table is hard. There's other people in the world. Like, these are sort of facts that that we don't tend to challenge, because they're just sort of accepted everyday facts about our existence. And my question, I sort of realized, my biggest question about God was like, well, why isn't God like that? Like, why couldn't God just be a totally, like, if God is real and exists the way that Christianity says that he does, why couldn't God just be like as obvious as any of those things I mentioned? And the response I usually hear back from that is like, one idea is that like, well, you know, you can't tell God how to be, that like maybe God has a good reason you don't know about. And like, And I'm like, okay, but that seems post hoc to me. And then the other one is that, like, well, if God showed up as undeniably as all those things you mentioned, that you wouldn't have any choice to believe in him. He would be removing your free will. And I don't buy that argument, because there's multiple times, like, if the scriptures, within the Christian worldview, if the scriptures are accurate, there's multiple times in the Bible where God revealed himself to someone in the Bible in a totally undeniable way. And it doesn't seem like that affected their ability to have free will. I mean, the best example is Adam and Eve, like the Bible, Genesis says God walked with Adam and Eve in the garden. So it sounds like they had a relationship with God that was as plain as my relationship with anyone else. And yet they chose to disobey him. So this idea that God making himself obvious to you would remove your free will, to me, that's just absurd. And so I think the divine hiddenness problem is a pretty big one. And for me, it's a lot of other problems are nested inside it. Yeah. So, okay. So that's a bit of a tangent. Maybe I should keep going, because we're an hour into this stream and I think I'm only halfway through this post. I thought this would blow by. I'm chattier than I thought, I guess. Okay. We're getting to a point that I might have some regrets here. Why does God seem so pissed off in most of the Old Testament, and then all of a sudden he's a loving father in the New Testament? Why does he say not to kill, but then instruct Israel to turn around and kill men, women, and children to take the promised land? Why does God let Job suffer horrible things just to win a bet with Satan? Why does he tell Abraham to kill his son? Brackets, more killing again. And then basically say, just kidding, that was a test. Why does Jesus have to die for our sins? More killing again. If God can do anything, can't he forgive without someone dying? I mean, my parents taught me to forgive people. Nobody dies in that scenario. Okay, there's things here that are maybe, this is a really accurate representation of some of the things that were bothering me. Why so much killing, right? Like both Old Testament and New Testament. Like, why is there so much killing? Why does God seem so, why is he depicted as such a jealous God, sometimes angry God in the Old Testament, and then sort of a loving father in the New Testament? Now, someone actually pointed out to me that when you make that distinction, it can kind of be a little anti-Semitic, because it's sort of saying like, hey, Christians got it right, and Jews believe in God differently than Christians, and Jews are horrible and Christians are awesome. And obviously, I hope you all know me well enough to know that that is not where my heart's at. As a Christian, I grew up just looking at both the Old Testament and New Testament as Christian scriptures. And so in this post, I was critiquing them as such. And so I was never setting out to sort of criticize Judaism, because I don't feel qualified to do that. So I just want to make that super clear. Whenever we start talking about some of the things in the Old Testament, I approach that a lot more carefully now than I did back then, for the reasons I just laid out. Because now I've come to feel that like Christianity sort of took the Hebrew scriptures and like spun its own sort of take on them by writing the New Testament and alluding to the Old Testament so much and including it in the Christian Bible. I mean, there's a bit of appropriation, is maybe too strong a word, but I've come to view this as in a more nuanced way, where I'm just like, okay, Christianity really, like, if I want to criticize Christianity, I probably should focus on the New Testament, because Christianity's core claims are about Jesus and the resurrection. And that probably should have the majority of my attention, because the Old Testament is a collection of writings that's shared by both Christianity and Judaism. And that's a lot more complicated. But still, within the Christian point of view, it's like Christianity posits that this is the same God the whole way through. So it is, despite what I just said, it is relevant to sort of wonder, like, hey, why does the depiction of God seem to change over time? And sort of that was one of my questions. I was like, well, like, if God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, which is what I grew up believing, then like the same God that we're worshiping today is the one that told Israel to take slaves in Deuteronomy 20, and that seemed to condone the taking of sex slaves in Numbers 31, and seemed to reaffirm slavery in 2 Peter in the New Testament. And in Hosea, God seems to indicate that like he will rip, children from someone's pregnant body. Like there's just like, if you're willing to see it, there's stuff all through the Bible that's like, right? And like Christian theologians do have answers to these questions. So I'm certainly not the first person to ask them, and I'm certainly not pretending that there aren't answers out there. But just the question for me was like approaching some of these scriptures that I had never really seen. It sort of gave me pause and going like, man, like why is there so much killing? And the conclusion I really found myself coming to was that there was so much killing because that's what it was like then. Like there was a lot of killing then, right? And it makes sense to me that if that's just how it was, that it would be baked into the scriptures that way. And it would also make sense to me that people writing these texts would be interested in defending their point of view. They probably, I don't know that they knew that they were writing scripture when they wrote these things, but when people write history, I mean, even look at, more modern history, you hear the phrase history is written by the victors, right? And so, if you read more modern history, like you tend to read history from the point of view of whoever, won the battle. And you read about battles from the point of view of the winners most often. And so I started to look at the Bible that way and go like, hey, a lot of the things written in the Bible are people sort of writing from their perspective, and a lot of times sort of looking for justifications for the things that maybe they've done or the ways that they've lived, or, like a defense, you could say, sort of a defense of their perspective of the world. And that's not just the writers of the Bible. That's anyone that writes anything ever, right? And so it just made me look at the Bible in a much more human way and go like, okay, like if we're taking biblical inerrancy off the table, and if we're taking the idea that these are God's words on these pages, if we're taking that off the table, then like, yeah, of course you would expect to see that the way people depict God over time would change. So yeah. Anyway, I need to keep going. I was raised to believe that the Bible was the perfect word of God. Okay, I guess this is where we're headed. Sure, it was written by human beings, but those people were divinely inspired, and we can consider the words they wrote to be the word of God. Yeah, I mean, biblical inerrancy, right? Like, it's a pretty core Protestant evangelical Protestant Christian belief. Catholics don't tend to look at biblical inerrancy the same way, and I find that interesting. There's plenty of Christians that hold the idea of the Bible being the word of God a lot more loosely, and especially the very strict version of inerrancy you see in a lot of evangelical circles today. That is new in the scope of Christianity. Like that's much newer in the last couple of 100 years, and even in the last 100 years. I would go and look up what's called the Chicago Statement on inerrancy, and I think that was written in the 70s, and that really solidified the Western evangelical view on what inerrancy means. So if you want to learn more about that, Google the Chicago Statement, I think it's called. It's not short either. Anyway, okay. I began to have questions and doubts about that, the Bible being the word of God. It seemed like there were a lot of contradictions in the Bible that didn't make sense. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, so I'll leave the details for another time. Yeah, I'm glad I did that. Suffice it to say that when I began to believe that the Bible was simply a book written by people as flawed and as imperfect as I am, that was when my belief in God truly began to unravel. So I've just talked about that, so we don't have to get too deep into that. During a vacation to Mexico with my wife's family, I had a revealing conversation with my father-in-law, who is also a pastor. Okay, so at this point, we're touching on we're touching on one of my other regrets. I wrote about a conversation in this post that I had with my father-in-law. I did not get his permission to write about him in this post. I revealed the contents of a private conversation in a post that ended up going viral and that was written about in national news. And I really regret doing that. I could have told the same story without mentioning him. I could have masked his identity. I could have even left out the fact that it was a conversation. I don't know. I could have done it differently, but I really do regret sort of bringing him into it, especially without him knowing. Yeah, that's a big regret for me. So both of my regrets that I've mentioned so far have to do with parents, my wife's parents and my parents. And that's a common thing, I think, for people that go through a process of deconstruction like this. Yeah, it can be really hurtful to parents, because they, especially if they're pastors like Jess's parents and my parents are, it can lead to the questions of them feeling like, hey, did I not do a good job raising you? And like side note, like they did. Did I not teach you right? And like, well, my parents taught me to be curious, and I think that was fantastic. So anyway, yeah, I regret mentioning my father-in-law here, and we've had a conversation about this. I mean, very quickly after this post, we had a sit down, and I apologized, and I feel bad about it still. But okay, let's keep going. Tom says, ooh, daddy issues. Yep. Don't we all have them? Okay. I was asking about a verse. Okay. Like my dad, I was talking about my father-in-law here. Like my dad, he is a loving father. He is patient and sincere and believes in God with all his heart. I think here I think I knew on some level that I was wading into dangerous territories by naming him here. And so I was trying to soften it. When I was writing that, I should have known, like, hey, if you feel the desire to soften this, maybe you should think about whether you're doing it right. So, yeah. Okay. I was asking about a verse in 1 Timothy that seems really oppressive of women. It indicates that women shouldn't be in church leadership, shouldn't teach men, and shouldn't wear their hair in braids. To me, that seemed less like the message of a loving God that most Christians believe in now, and more like the ideas that would have been present in the culture at the time, a male-dominated society where women were treated less like equals and more like property. I still agree with that. Like, I still find the two verses that talk about women in the writings of Paul, 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy. And Will Thorpe, if you're in the chat, just confirm for me, 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy are two of the letters that really are believed to have been written by Paul, I believe. Paul, a lot of the letters are attributed to Paul, but I think 13 are attributed to him or something like that. But there's only 7 that scholars universally agree probably actually were Paul. And 1 Timothy and 1 Corinthians, I believe, are both attributed to Paul pretty universally. So, yeah. Okay, so there are these two passages that talk about how women should behave in church. And basically, they say that women shouldn't teach, and that if they want to learn, that they should be taught by their husbands at home. And, I've heard from a number of different people that, oh, no, like Paul didn't mean like that women shouldn't teach at all. Paul actually was talking about a very specific woman, in this very specific town who was like leading a cult or something like that. And I think that's a pretty big leap because Paul actually references Eve. Like he goes all the way back to Eve, which says to me he's setting a precedent for all women. Sometimes people bring up that listed among the apostles, there actually is one woman, but that woman is named alongside her husband. I think it's Priscilla and Aquila. And then some people will say, well, she is named first, so that's significant. And I go like, Like, are we really going to try and argue that women were treated as equals back then? Like, the culture, that was not in the culture. Like, I just don't think that that's a plausible thing to argue. So it actually would make a ton of sense. It would be in character that Paul would be talking about women not speaking up in church. Like, that would make sense given the culture at the time. So if it seems to be what Paul is saying, and it also would be in line with the culture of the time, then we would need overwhelming evidence to take it any other way. And it just isn't there for me. So anyway, that's me. So let's keep going. My father-in-law asked me if I had been reading the King James Version because he felt that King James had put his own spin on a lot of things and that version couldn't fully be trusted. That's something I've learned a little bit more about over the last year. The King James Version, a lot of Christian theologians sort of think that like the King James Version is problematic. So yeah, that's a side issue. But my father-in-law said to me, in this conversation, you have to go back to the original Greek, and that's something that a lot of Christians will say, and I think that is a good point, and I didn't necessarily really in this post give him a lot of credit for that, but it's a good point because we are all reading the Bible in a translated language, and so certain punchlines won't land the same way, certain euphemisms won't land the same way. Like one of the examples is in the Gospel of John, when Jesus says, "You must be born again." In the Greek, that could be taken born again or born from above. And I think it was Zacchaeus basically took it as born again, and he got confused. And he's like, how could I be born again? And there's like a double entendre going on there that only works in Greek. And so like in English, it like doesn't work. Incidentally, this is another point of evidence that I'm not going to get into that. If Will Thorpe is watching, you know where I'm going, but I think that's going to be a rabbit hole. Anyway. Okay, so you have to go back to the original Greek, he says. This is something I've heard a lot over the years. I asked him, so it sounds like you believe that modern translations can't fully be trusted because they are human, flawed, and imperfect. I'm simply taking that thought to its next natural conclusion, that the original Greek is also human, flawed, and imperfect, and also can't fully be trusted. He replied, well, if you believe that, what do you have left? And I said, exactly. And that wasn't me trying to dunk on him. When I said exactly, by the way, in that conversation, that was me in the moment realizing the implications of what I was saying. Like I was saying like, oh, like you're not sure about these translations, but you're sure about the original. I'm just saying like, I'm not sure about the original. Also at this point, I didn't realize that we don't have any of the original autographs. I didn't know that yet. Or maybe I did. I can't remember. Actually, I might have. But when I said exactly, I was saying it to myself as much as anything because I was like, oh, so you mean to say that like, if I'm doubting the whole thing, like what my father-in-law was saying is like, well, you have to hold on to something. Like if you're going to be a Christian, you have to hold on to something as true. And for him, that thing is the original Greek version of the Bible, of the New Testament. And I was saying like, well, I don't necessarily hold that that's true. And I realized in that moment the implications. I think that was one of the moments where I was like, well, maybe I'm not a Christian. And I think that was actually kind of scary for me in that moment. Anyway, let's keep going. Once I found that I didn't believe the Bible was the perfect word of God, it didn't take long to realize that I was no longer sure he was there at all. That thought terrified me. It sent me into a tailspin. The implications of that idea were absolutely massive. I began to ask myself, what now? Over the past year, I've occasionally mentioned, so at that point I wrote over the past year. That was referring to the previous year before I posted. I've occasionally mentioned publicly my struggles with depression. This is what really kicked that off. Well, I forgot that I wrote about that. That's true. That realization that I didn't believe in God kicked off maybe a year of heavy, heavy, heavy depression for me. Because I felt so vulnerable. I felt like I had always believed in this God that was looking out for me, and now I didn't have that belief, and it was terrifying. Yeah. So therapy is how I dealt with that. Okay. What do you do when the rug is pulled out from under your feet? When you find yourself no longer believing the thing at the core of how you see yourself and see the world? What do I teach my own children? That was a big deal for me. I was having kids at that time, and my kids are 4 and 2 now. And what I teach them about the world and about existence that's as motivating to me as anything else. If I'm honest about this, will all my Christian friends abandon me? I worried about that. And it definitely put some distance between me and some of my Christian friends. But so many of my Christian friends that I'm closest to were so supportive. Like I said earlier, some of them shared the same doubts as me. Maybe they weren't ready to be public like I was, but they had questions and they were at least empathetic to my questions. So I really appreciate that. Will this alienate me from my family? Will this leave me with nothing? Yes, I was worried about both those things. Those are questions that led me into a very dark place for a while. I feel like I've mostly emerged from that dark place now because I've discovered that life really does go on. I have trusted friends that know this about me and love me anyways. That's still true. My family is showing me incredible love and support, even though I know this grieves them. That's also true. And still true. The last year, there's been some ups and downs for our relationship with family, both Jess and I and our families. There's been some ups and downs and some things that we could have done better, for sure. But ultimately, like, we really love each other and we still have each other in our lives, and I'm grateful for that. While I can no longer stand on stage and in good conscience sing songs like Drops in the Ocean, I no longer fear losing my place in Christian music. I know this means giving it up voluntarily. Yeah, so at that point, we had already sort of begun to wind the band down. We had actually finished winding the band down, I guess. But I knew this was the nail in the coffin. Like, it's like, if I post this, I can never go back. There's no sort of like reunion tour going on, right? And so that was a loss, but it was one that I felt like honesty sort of required of me. So, okay. I think the open part is key here. I wrote, I'm ready to be transparent and open. I think that open part is key. I'm open to the idea that God is there. I'd prefer it if he was. Now, this is interesting. This is where I might differ from some of my atheist friends. In the last year, I've been so like warmly embraced by 2 communities. Well, 3 really. One is this sort of loose community that's built around deconstruction. I say loose because it's real loose. Like, there's different people that have different beliefs, different views, but there's this sense of support in this deconstruction community. It's like, hey, like, if you're sort of deconstructing your beliefs and trying to figure out what's real and what's true, like, we get how hard that is. So we want to be in each other's corner. So like, that loose community that's formed over the last year has been very warm to me. Another community is the sort of progressive Christian community has been very, very welcoming to me. And I think on values, like what things are really important for us in life, and what we value, I think progressive Christians are very aligned with my views. We see a lot of things the same way value-wise, even though I think there's some beliefs within progressive Christianity that I don't necessarily hold myself, but it's like we can get on the same page if we value the same things, right? And then the third community that's been really, really warm to me is the sort of internet atheist community. People that, no joke, like 2 years ago, I would have been scared to talk to some of these people because I still had this entrenched, like, sort of sense that, like, ooh, they're bad. They're out to get me. Maybe they're into some scary stuff. Something about the word atheist even sounded threatening, I think, to me on some level. And then to see to have this sort of warm embrace and like, a lot of the sort of internet atheist community, they've seen me be a little all over the place on exactly what my perspective is. And I've never gotten this sense that like, you have to believe this, this, and this, and this, or else you're like out. Like, there seems to be like some wiggle room in there that I've really appreciated. So I'm going to maybe play into this wiggle room here. Yeah, when I'm saying, I said in this post, I'm open to the idea that God is there. I'd prefer it if he was. Yeah, so I actually still, if I could choose, I wish there was a loving God. I do. There are a lot of ideas in Christian perspective, sort of like a Christian culture and Christian perspective and Christian doctrines that I don't wish were true. Like eternal conscious torment makes no sense to me. As far as like, if you're going to believe in an all powerful and an all loving God, and then also believe in eternal conscious torment, like if annihilationism is an option, eternal conscious torment makes zero sense unless you want to believe that God really does take pleasure in like torturing people unnecessarily. And I just like, such a God would not be an all-loving God to me. So to me, just like, it's a contradiction that I can't get past. But could there be a God that is loving and is mysterious enough that like doesn't make their presence known for some reason, but then has good intentions for us at heart, and then like those good intentions will play out in some sort of mystical way after we die? I mean, it sounds good. And I think that's the promise, honestly, that a lot of progressive Christians want to believe in. That there's this sort of amorphous, vague idea of the divine, and that the divine loves us and means well for us and will cause all things to work out for good. I like that idea, you know, and I would love to believe in that kind of God. When I look at the world and my experiences, I have a hard time getting there. So I think technically I'm more atheistic than I'm more of an atheist than a progressive Christian, although like I love both communities dearly. Because again, I think we're very aligned on values. But this is one area in which I've heard some atheists say that they're glad that there's no God, that they don't wish there was a God. And I sometimes find myself wishing that there was. Of course, I would want that God to have certain traits that, of course, I'd want to be up to me, which is, you know, that's not how it works, obviously. Okay. So I'm open to the idea that God is there. I'd prefer it if he was. I suspect that if he is there, he's very different than what I was taught. I know my parents pray that God reveals himself to me. If he's there, I hope he does. I still mean that. If God is real, like I want to know God, you know, if God was real, I would like, if it's possible to have a relationship with this God, I would want that. I just don't see it. And I don't experience it. Everything that I experience in life leads me to believe that that's not the case. And so I just don't want to build my whole life on wishful thinking, I guess. Okay, so let's keep going. Until then, I feel like the best thing I can do is be honest. Stepping away from belief in God has felt like a loss in some ways, but it's felt like freedom in others. Jess and I both always had this sense that we weren't doing enough of the things we were supposed to do as Christians. We didn't enjoy going to church. We didn't enjoy reading the Bible. We didn't enjoy praying. Okay, the irony is I actually do enjoy reading the Bible now. Like I've read the Bible more in the last 2 years than my entire life before. And I'm reading it in completely new ways. I'm studying it in completely new ways. If you're interested in a more secular perspective on the Bible, Yale University actually puts Bible courses out on YouTube for free. And so I think Professor Christine Hayes, I think is her name. She teaches this amazing course on the Old Testament. And it's available online. It's like 12 or maybe it's 24 parts. I can't remember. It's long. But it's really, really good. And then I think there is a New Testament one as well, but I haven't watched that one. So yeah, I would recommend that. Okay, so getting back to this. We didn't enjoy praying. That's true. We didn't enjoy worship. That's an interesting one. I enjoyed playing music, but I didn't enjoy going to church and being in the audience for worship times because I felt like there was all this pressure to participate and like get swept away emotionally. And I remember being in these hyper emotional worship services and being like watching everyone around me being absolutely swept away in this emotion. And it's hella long. Oh yeah, talking about the course, the Yale courses. I get distracted by the comments. I never know how much to dive into those, but let's get through this post and then we'll dive in. I realize we're already at 90 minutes, so kind of long, but hey, I'm grateful that you're hanging in there with me. All right. It all felt like obligation. Yeah, like the obligation to participate. Like in those worship services, sometimes I would feel like, what are these people experiencing that I'm not experiencing? And I felt like I was unwilling to manufacture the experience for myself. And I don't want to say that that's what they were doing because I don't know what their experience was. It's a subjective experience, is inherently subjective. So it's not fair for me to say that they were manufacturing it for themselves. But I knew that I wasn't willing to manufacture it for myself and I didn't experience it. So my conclusion was sort of that like either they're being swept away in some sort of emotional thing that maybe isn't God, or they're being swept up in some sort of emotional thing that is God, and God has chosen not to sweep me up in it. and that always made me feel really left out. Because I felt like in my gut, like the thing that I would have to do in order to participate is manufacture it for myself. Or at least manufacture the beginnings of it in the hopes that it would grow from there. And I just could never do that. Okay, let's keep going. It all felt like obligation, and our lack of enthusiasm about those things always made us feel like something was wrong with us. Now, I don't believe anything was wrong. Now I don't believe anything was wrong with us. We simply didn't believe, and we were too afraid to admit that to ourselves. So in that sense, we have a tremendous sense of relief now. That's absolutely true. Like I no longer feel the obligation to BS a single thing. I'm honest about what I believe and don't believe. I try to be honest about when I'm wrong. Over the past year, there's been plenty of things that I've gotten wrong. Plenty of things that were worth revisiting, and plenty of things, that things that I had said that maybe required clarification, or maybe I was just wrong. So yeah, it's a relief to be able to go like, hey, like if you're willing to admit that you're wrong, then you can live with a lot of freedom. Yeah. Okay. I'm hoping that writing this contributes to that relief. As I've processed these thoughts and feelings over the past year or so, I've avoided writing online about matters of faith. I didn't want to pretend to believe anything I didn't believe, but I also didn't want to rock the boat. Yeah, if you look at my Instagram, for the previous 3 or 4 months before this, I had been writing a book about creativity on Instagram, which I might need to finish at some point. But it's a bunch of Post-it notes. If you go back far enough on my Instagram, you'll see it. I was writing a post daily that I was planning on turning into a book. And so maybe I'll do that someday, but not right now. I'm not sure how much of this will rock the boat. I don't know if this will surprise anyone, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that I've finally worked up the courage to tell my story, to share my deepest truth, and that feels like freedom too. It's going to be 72 degrees here in San Diego today. The sun is shining. It's a beautiful day. No sweater needed. And that was me referencing the sweater metaphor earlier in the post. A couple of people that are close to me, actually, ironically, this was interesting. The part that bothered them the most was that last paragraph, because it felt flippant to them. Like it felt casual. Like the whole rest of the post, some people close to me felt like I had been really wrestling with it and thoughtful. And then at the very end, I was too casual. And that was probably just a result of the fact that I had been living with this for some time and I was ready to sort of be a little casual with it. And for them, this was, new information. So I wouldn't say that's a regret, but that's just something I sort of remember. Anyway, so that's the end of the post. I think most of that holds up for me. I definitely still find myself very curious about the origins of the universe. So I'm curious about evolution. I'm curious about how evolution got started, how life got started. I'm curious about spirituality. And are we talking about psychology when we're talking about spirituality? My gut says yes. Like my gut says when we're talking about these spiritual things, spiritual practices, that there's a heavy, 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 heavy psychological element to it. And so in that sense, that's why I think some quote unquote spiritual practices are actually really meaningful. Meditation is hugely beneficial. There's a ton of research on it. And I think prayer is sort of a form of meditation. So there's good evidence, sort of scientific evidence that's not even woo-woo, that there are some spiritual practices that can be really beneficial. I just sort of question the metaphysical truth claims behind some of those spiritual practices. So I felt like that's something that's become more nuanced for me over the last year. Yeah. So let's hop over to the chat. Okay. Holy crap. Someone did a $99 super chat. Oh, I feel really embarrassed. Thank you for your generosity. I'm really humbled by that. I was not expecting that. Yeah, so I appreciate that because that actually genuinely does help me support my family. Other than the built-in monetization on YouTube, I haven't really been trying to make any money on this. The only reason I turn on the monetization on YouTube is that it's built in. And so it sort of felt like something I could just turn on and not really think too much about. That is not really a source of revenue exactly. Like for all of you YouTubers out there, you know how much is required to actually make real money on YouTube. And I'm certainly not doing that. But I've been doing this YouTube channel and this podcast as a creative outlet, a hobby, and something that I hope is meaningful to others. So Anthony Guthrie, this 99.99 super chat, I'm just stunned. So thank you for supporting me and my family. That's amazing. Okay, let's actually get to that question. I really appreciate John's courage in sharing his story and helping. Oh, I think I can put it in. Can I put it if I favorite it? I think there's a way to put it on the screen. Oh, search. And I'm learning here. Favorite. Can I put that on the screen? I know I can. Someone's going to tell me how to do it here in a second. I've done it once before. Hey, there we go. It worked. I really appreciate John's courage in sharing his story and helping others to feel comfortable in questioning. If anyone is struggling, I recommend the Clergy Project for those who feel stuck in a religious career, and the Recovering from Religion Foundation. Yes, Anthony, thank you so much for suggesting that, and thank you for your amazing super chat. Yeah, both of those organizations exist to help people sort of that are coming out of religious spaces. The Clergy Project in particular isn't something I know a ton about personally, but I do know that their aim is to support pastors and ministers who are doubting and questioning. So yeah, that's huge. That's super huge. Thank you, Anthony, for that. Let's look at some other super chats. All right. Shannon, help me out. Oh, here's Daniel Kelly. Getting late in the UK, but I'm constantly impressed by your curiosity and openness. Thank you, Daniel Kelly. Guys, I'm going to have to, if I'm going to become a streamer, I'm going to have to get better at this. I want to find all the super chats. I'm using this program called Ecamm, and it doesn't necessarily make it easy to find all the super chats. I think there were some earlier. I want to give credence to them. Oh, here we go. Oh no, that's Anthony's. And Guys, I suck at this part, huh? Aw, Shannon Q, super chat. Love seeing you live. Thank you. Okay, guys. In the future, I'm going to have to get better at the super chat thing. But go ahead and in the comments right now, if you have a question, or if you're someone who already did a super chat, or whether you did or not, if you have a question, rewrite it again, because there's been all this stuff and I'd love to address it. So deconstructing colors, that's my girl C. She says, my kitchen cabinets look awesome. I think we were talking about painting kitchen cabinets. Matthew Simpson says, is there any particular person or subject that you're eager to explore in the future? Yes. I want to get more into world religions. So I would love to do an episode where I go to... Shannon keeps texting me now. Are you in the control room? Shannon, let's just do a call later and you can teach me how to do this stuff. I want to do an episode about Buddhism, and because there's a lot of Buddhist practices that have been really meaningful to me. Meditation being sort of the biggest one, and a lot of Buddhist ideas that have been really meaningful to me. And I would love to go to a Buddhist sort of temple, and there's actually one in Escondido, not too far from where I live, where I would love to interview a few Buddhist monks and maybe have them take me through some of the core tenets of Buddhism and maybe walk me through a meditation. And I would love to film that and share that as an episode, and maybe do things like that with a number of different religions, mostly to understand other religions better. Not because I believe in sort of the metaphysical truth claims behind any of them, but religion is a hugely powerful force in our world. And so many people adhere to one religion or another that it's really something that I feel like is worth learning about. And so, I would love to do a series where I tackle a bunch of different world religions by actually physically going to a mosque or to a temple and immersing myself in it for a period of time. And maybe it would be like a several part thing. So I think that would be cool. Okay, what else do we got here? Bobby Hood, thank you for the super chat. My deconstruction happened only 4 months before your announcement. It was like reading my own story, same age even. Your voice has been welcome in my living room ever since. Thank you so much, Bobby. That's the thing, is that people feel so alone in this process so often. And so that's why I think if you're someone who's gone through a process like this, if you know people in your life that you think might be going through some sort of process of deconstruction, I just encourage you, if you're in a place where you feel like it's safe for you, if it's a safe space, come alongside some of these people, not in a desire to influence them at all, but just to be there for them. One person who recently on Twitter just a few days ago labeled himself an ex-evangelical is Kevin Max of DC Talk. And a few people texted me and was like, hey, do you know Kevin? Like, do you know about this? And actually, Kevin and I do know each other. We've written songs together before. And I texted him when I saw his ex-evangelical post, and I said, hey, like, are you doing okay? You know, what's your vibe? Like, are you in a good place right now? Are you in a bad place? And he said, he said that he had been more or less deconstructing for quite some time. And that actually makes sense, because he's been wondering about a lot of things for a long time. And he's even said this on his Twitter account since then, that, like, you know, he's been going through a process, something like deconstruction, for many years. And I think that's really true. He just didn't have the word deconstruction, similar to the fact that I didn't. Yeah. So, reach out to people. Ex-Christian Aaron asks, will you ever have Jess on the show? You know, Jess and I have talked about that, and we have had plans to do that. We just haven't done it because, quite candidly, someone would need to be watching our 2 kids. And the moments that we have to have someone watching our 2 kids are so few and far between that making an episode has not been forefront on our mind. Typically, it'll be like, hey, let's fix something on the house, or let's go get a date night, or let's, go do an errand that requires a lot of thought, or like let's just finish our sentences. Like, it's so hard for you parents of toddlers. It's hard to finish your sentences with your toddlers around. And so, yeah, Aaron, we'd love to have, Jess and I would love to do a show together. And I know that would be a really meaningful for especially couples who are going through a process of deconstruction, or one of the individuals in the couple is going through that process. Totally. Okay. Maybe a couple of more questions. Oh, Shannon, you're very sweet. Deconstructing Colors also asking, when is your lovely partner going to be on? Yep. Georgian asks, Kevin Mack's no longer a believer. That's awesome. I think he actually considers himself, I don't know exactly what he considers himself. He has said he believes in the universal Christ, which is a sort of a progressive Christian idea. So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly where he labels himself, but if you follow my channel at all, you know that labels are not necessarily the most meaningful thing to me. Like, I would rather concern myself with people's health and wellness and like what's going on in their life here and now, rather than like, how do you label your belief? Yeah. Luke Roberts asks Hawk Nelson reunion. That's probably not likely. Yeah, I think that I could see a reunion of the four of us getting together to have a few beers and to hang out, but to play music, probably not. It'd be pretty complicated. Not because we don't like each other. We actually really love each other. It's just, it would be a little weird, right? Like, after everything that's happened the last year, for me to go and sing those songs, it's not likely. Will Thorpe asks, when you to Disneyland? I think you're asking, will you go to Disneyland now that it's open? Yeah, I want to take my kids to Disneyland. Bad. Disney World in Florida has been open, but Disneyland, I think, is just opening now. So, yeah, we do need to do that. Oh my gosh. Darren Gill asks, how's the roller skating going, John? Well, my partner is doing roller skating. I am not roller skating. Nope. I would fall. I'm not coordinated. Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, we're approaching, not quite at 2 hours, but getting close there. I'm looking at some of these comments. Being on mute on stream is my brand. He can't have it. Yeah, Shannon. We've had that issue before. I love it. Well, guys, Shannon Q says, I'm actually an asshole, FYI. No, you're not. Ronald, my super chat was, would you be interested in starting a clergy project style program for Christian artists? That's interesting. Not formally. Here, let me put that on the screen so people can see the question. Yeah, Ronald's question is basically like, would I be interested in starting a program for Christian artists that helps them as they transition out of Christianity, if that's what they want? Yeah, my answer to that would be probably no, because I'm very wary about starting things, because I love starting things. I've started a lot of things in my life. I am not as good at following through. And so every time I start something, I've learned to go like, hey, is this something I'm going to be able to follow through on? And I just think that I don't have the stamina to keep that up as an institution. But every time I hear about a Christian artist who sounds like they're going through some form of deconstruction, I typically, if it's someone I know personally, I'll typically reach out and text them and say like, hey, look, I have no agenda. I care about you. I care about your family. Like, can I help? And like, can I even just like, do you want to talk to me? And I've had multiple Christian artists whose names take me up on that. And I'm not going to out them because that's part of the deal, is that I'm not interested in sort of outing people. I want people to feel safe coming to me if we have stuff in common. So yeah, I don't think I would do it formally, Ronald, but I would do it casually, and I do it casually. just before we wrap up, I just want to give anyone else an opportunity, anyone else that has questions, but specifically people who may have done a super chat that I have missed. If you're still on here and if you did a super chat and I didn't answer it, could you please just type it again? I would love to honor and respect the fact that you're choosing to contribute to my channel here. I would love to honor that. With that before we go. So, Linda Pampered Chef says, you are one of my first YouTubers I found with deconstructing, and knowing I'm not alone means so much. Thank you so much, Linda. That's awesome. Ronald says, thank you for the answer. Of course. Luke Roberts says, best live stream ever. I'm glad you feel, Luke, that the quality of the live stream has nothing to do with my ability in operating a live stream. All right, I'm going to hang out here for just one more minute. Anyone that has any additional questions, especially, like I said, people that did a super chat and I haven't gotten to, I really want to make sure that I get to answering especially those super chats, but any other questions you might have. Thought on 10th Ave North having a farewell tour. Yeah, so 10th Ave is another Christian band. Those guys are some dear friends of mine. And they called it quits recently, and mostly because each individual member of the band has moved on to other things. Ruben is doing real estate. Jason is working with Compassion International. Jeff is doing music production. And then Mike Donahue, he wrote a book, and then he's doing some solo stuff. Actually, he's releasing a ton of solo stuff right now. And he's one of my dear, dear friends. He is a Christian, but he is of the persuasion that he is of the type that is extremely loving, really wrestles with the theology of it, and cares deeply, deeply, deeply about people. And so he's one of those people that I'm just like, yeah, I do not have a hard time calling him a close friend, even though we don't necessarily believe the same. Lisa is asking, an episode on a deconstructing Catholic. That's interesting. That would be interesting. I need to find some deconstructing Catholics, actually. I know I have a friend who has a podcast called Cordial Catholic, who started out evangelical Protestant and became Catholic, converted to Catholicism, and I've been on his podcast. So that's sort of the opposite of deconstructing Catholic. So that's interesting. But yeah, that'd be an interesting thing to do. Jessica Fran asks, will you ever go back to writing secular music or solo music? Yeah, so I don't think so. At least not for a career. I really doubt it. Writing music for a career is such a hustle. Like, it is so hard to make a living doing music. You have to be so all in. You have to be so all in to make it work. And I just don't think that that's where my life is headed. I feel like that is more my past than my future. So yeah, I still like playing the piano for my kids, and that's about it. I'm totally content not doing music anymore. I don't miss it at all. Isn't that weird? That something can be a huge part of your life for 15 years and then it's just not. Strange. Anthony is asking, how long do you have planned out content on here? I need suggestions for folks to talk to. Oh, need suggestions. Derek with Myth Vision would be interested, for example. Actually, Derek and I have talked over email, and we actually do have plans to connect because I think Derek's an interesting guy, and I would like to do that. Right now, I actually have front-loaded my show. The next couple of months of episodes are already recorded. And there's a couple reasons for that. Some of it I can't get into. There's some things going on in my personal life that are a pretty big deal. Stuff to do with my family and my kids. We're all good. We're okay. But we're in a season that is going to require that I spend a lot more time and energy on my family. And I am going to do that. And so a couple of the ways I'm doing that are we're spending the entire month of June out of the country. we're going out of country and we're completely removing ourselves from our normal lives. And so during that time, those episodes will be, I've recorded enough content to get me through the month of June. And then also, we're considering moving out of our house and moving into a different living situation. And that will also probably mean I won't be filming in this Airstream anymore. This is where I record all my shows. This is my office that I work in. And so our life is just going to look really different. And we're totally reorganizing our lives so I can work a lot less and be a lot more focused on my family and my kids. And for a couple of reasons, that has become really, really, really critical for me. So I hesitate to get more specific than that because it involves my kids in a way that I feel like is going to be their story more than mine. And it just doesn't feel like it's my story. So they're only 4 and 2, but they've got their own lives that they're growing into. And I don't want to put their lives out into the internet for my own show. So yeah, I'm keeping that a little bit more private. But suffice it to say, I've got several months lined up of content. And then once we get back from being out of the country, I'll start doing some more interviews. But typically, these shows are pre-recorded about, at least 4 to 6 weeks out, something like that. What else do we got? I think we had another super chat come in. Benaya, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Benaya, thank you so much for the super chat. Benaya says, thanks for all that you do. You have helped me and my family deconstruct. Have you talked to Colby Martin, Kate and Colby show? Okay, what's interesting is Colby and Kate, Kate and Colby, they live in San Diego, not far away from me. I believe they pastor a sort of progressive Christian church or movement, and we have talked privately quite a bit. I would like to have him on the show. That's not something I've done just yet. And honestly, like, priority one is like, I think Colby's a cool dude. And so I would love to get a beer with him. And I don't know if he drinks or not, but if he does, I would love to get a beer with him and just chat. So yeah, thank you, Benaya, for mentioning, again, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right. Thank you for mentioning Colby. He is someone that is on my mind and I have spoken with and definitely, want to connect with more. Here's a good one. Did music trigger you during deconstruction at all because it was so based in Christianity? Yes. I didn't listen to almost any music for probably 2 years. If I was running, I listened to podcasts or YouTube videos or something like that. So I've only recently begun to listen to music more. And that Coldplay song, Higher Power, that came out recently, I love that song. And I know it sounds like a Hillsong worship song. So I think a year ago, I would have not been able to listen to that. But now I think I found more peace because I know it sounds like a worship song and I still love it. And it's a perfect tempo to run to, at least for my pace. So it's kind of awesome. All right. Jeremy Smith says, you seem like I read the last part of this and I didn't realize I was putting on something that it looks like I'm just tooting my own horn putting this up here now. You seem like a really nice, cool guy. Thanks, Jeremy. I'm totally active in my religion, but I love hearing different perspectives and experiences. Thanks for all the insights. Jeremy, see, I love stuff like this because this is someone who believes differently than me, but appreciates the different perspectives. Like, thank you. That is awesome. Okay. I think it is about time to wrap up here. I'm just going to look and see if there's any last questions. Yeah. What is the music artist perspective about runtime? I don't totally understand that question. You can gift the Airstream to me, says Ronald. Yeah. No, we're going to be using it for something else. Anyway, we're approaching 2 hours and I really don't want the first number in the runtime to be a 2. I want it to be a 1. So we're going to call it right here. So guys, thank you so much for watching this. I'm really honored that you guys care at all to watch this and to listen to what I have to say. I want to do more streams in the future because it's fun. So Shannon will educate me, and then we'll get going and get better off in that way. So thank you guys so much. Hit me up on Instagram or Twitter, John Steingard, and I'll see you next time.